The morning sun rose over the dusty town of Ndlovu, its rays cutting through a haze of red earth and smoke. In a cramped mud brick house at the edge of the village, Amahle tied her faded headscarf and smoothed her worn dress. Her fingers were thin, calloused from scrubbing floors and washing linens. At 23, Amahle had known more hardship than most twice her age, yet her eyes held a quiet strength, the kind shaped by love and pain in equal measure. Outside, the town buzzed to life, vendors shouting over heaps of mangoes and plantains, children chasing stray goats through the alleys. Amahle moved quickly through the streets, her head bowed, clutching a small woven basket. Her destination lay uphill, past the bustling markets and clay houses, the estate of Mr. Kwame, one of the wealthiest men in the region. The mansion sat like a giant stone amongst thorns, tall iron gates, marble columns, imported tiles, a world apart from the rest of Ndlovu. Amahle worked there as a cleaner, though few acknowledged her presence. The other servants called her the ghost, silent, efficient, invisible. Mr. Kwame himself, a man in his late 40s with cold eyes and a reputation for ruthlessness, hardly noticed her beyond issuing commands through his steward. His empire had been built on trade, but his heart, many whispered, had long turned to stone after the betrayal of an old lover. Inside the mansion, the contrast was jarring, gleaming floors, velvet curtains, tables laden with food. Every morning, Amahle would arrive early, sweeping out dust, polishing the brass railings and folding clothes with trembling hands. The aroma of roasted meats and fresh bread often wafted through the air, teasing her empty stomach. Yet Amahle never touched what was not hers. Pride and necessity kept her silent. But at the end of her shift, after ensuring her duties were done, Amahle would quietly approach the kitchen. There, in a soft voice, she would ask the cook or one of the maids, "Please, is there any leftover food today?" At first the staff sneered. "Look at her," they whispered. "Begging like a dog." The words stung, but Amahle kept her gaze down, hands folded before her. In time they grew used to her request. Each day they'd fill her basket with scraps, half a loaf of bread, overripe fruit, bones with bits of meat still clinging. Unknown to them, Amahle never took a bite for herself. Despite her hunger, she would walk the long road home with the basket, her stomach growling, mouth dry. Her hunger was a lesser concern. The villagers watched her with scorn. "There goes the beggar girl," old Mama Zola would say, shaking her head. "She works in a palace but begs for scraps. She's probably feeding some lazy man," others chuckled. "You know these girls." Amahle heard it all but said nothing. Her heart was heavy, but her resolve was firm. Each step she took through the dusty streets, each jeer that followed her, was endured for a reason no one could see. For love, for duty, for the one waiting beyond the laughter and judgment. And so, with each passing day, Amahle carried her burden, quiet, unseen, mocked by the world but moved by a force greater than her hunger. What no one understood was that behind her humble frame stood a story of heartbreak, resilience, and a secret that would soon come to light, one that would shake even the cold heart of Mr. Kwame himself. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped low over Ndlovu, the scent of spice and roasted meat drifted through the mansion's grand halls. The staff bustled about, clearing the remnants of a lavish luncheon hosted by Mr. Kwame for visiting businessmen. Amahle worked silently in the corner of the kitchen, her movements swift and precise as she wiped the counters and gathered discarded bread crusts into a small cloth. Thinking herself alone, she whispered to the cook in a voice barely above the hum of the cooling ovens, "Please, if there is any bread left, may I take some?" Her tone was humble, almost apologetic. Unbeknownst to her, Mr. Kwame had entered the adjoining pantry in search of an imported wine. Through the half-open door her voice reached him, soft, trembling. He paused, one hand on a dusty bottle, curiosity stirring beneath his usual indifference. He listened as the cook sighed and handed her a small bundle. "You come every day," the cook muttered. "For whom, I wonder? Not enough for yourself, is it?" Amahle only bowed her head. "Thank you," she murmured. From the shadows, Mr. Kwame's sharp gaze narrowed. The girl had been working at his estate for nearly 2 years, always quiet, efficient, unremarkable. He had paid her no mind, one of many faceless servants. Yet this repeated request, so regular, so careful, pricked at him. Why would a girl too proud to beg in the open plead for scraps in secret? For herself? He doubted it. Her own frame, though lean, showed signs of careful restraint. No, it had to be for someone else. A lover, perhaps. Some idle young man she supported, while pretending to live with dignity. The thought irritated him. He had seen such foolishness before, women wasting their lives for unworthy men. and it reminded him bitterly of his own past. Years ago Mr. Kwame had been a man of softer edges, open to love and trust. That was before Adissa, the woman who had deceived him, bleeding his fortune and heart dry before vanishing with another man. Since then trust had no place in his world. He built walls of gold and stone around himself, never allowing the weakness of sympathy to return. Now, watching Amahle from the shadows, a familiar suspicion bloomed. Perhaps she was no different from the rest, a poor girl entangled with some scoundrel too blind to see. As she left the kitchen, clutching her small bundle, an idea took root. He would find out the truth. That evening in his private study, Mr. Kwame summoned his long-serving driver, Kojo, a stout man with grizzled hair and eyes that missed little. "Kojo," he began, swirling a glass of brandy, "you know the cleaner girl, Amahle?" Kojo nodded. "Yes, sir. The quiet one. She leaves with food every day. I want to know where she goes. Tomorrow after her shift, follow her. Discreetly. Report to me." Kojo hesitated. "You think she is stealing, sir?" Mr. Kwame's eyes hardened. "I think she is hiding something. I want to know what." Kojo bowed. "As you wish." But as the evening wore on and the mansion grew silent, restlessness gnawed at Mr. Kwame. The image of Amahle's bowed head, her whispered plea replayed in his mind. There was something too deliberate in her actions, too careful. The curiosity became a dull ache, one his driver's second-hand account would not satisfy. By morning he had decided. He would follow her himself. At the end of the day, as the staff departed, Mr. Kwame exchanged his fine suit for a plain tunic and trousers, the kind worn by merchants in the town. He tucked a cap low over his brow and took one of the older, dust-covered cars from the garage. Kojo raised an eyebrow but said nothing. From the driver's seat, Mr. Kwame waited down the road from the estate, eyes trained on the gates. When Amahle emerged, basket in hand, head low, he started the engine and followed at a distance, careful to stay unnoticed. Through winding streets and narrow alleys, he trailed her. His curiosity, once idle, now burned. Who was she feeding? A man? A child? An old debt? The truth, he was certain, would soon reveal itself, and he would see this girl for what she truly was. And so, unknown to Amahle, the man she feared and served trailed her through the shadows, driven by suspicion, past pain, and a growing sense of unease, a journey that would soon unravel not only her secret but the hardened layers of his own heart. The narrow, overgrown path seemed to close in around Amahle as she pressed deeper into the woods. The tall grasses brushed against her legs, tree branches arched overhead, dimming the last rays of sunlight. The forest here was not the wild, ancient kind, but a forgotten fringe where the village's poorest sought shelter when no other place remained. Mr. Kwame followed at a distance, his breath tight in his chest. The ground grew uneven beneath his feet. Here, far from the busy streets of Ndlovu, the world seemed quieter, haunted even. His polished shoes were now dust-covered, his fine trousers stained from brambles. But he scarcely noticed. His focus remained locked on the slim figure ahead of him, Amahle moving with quiet determination, basket still cradled carefully in her arms. At last, through a tangle of brush, a small clearing opened before her. In its center stood a broken-down shack, leaning heavily to one side. Its walls were pieced together from rotting wood and sheets of rusted tin. The roof sagged under the weight of fallen branches and moss. It looked barely habitable, more ruin than home. Mr. Kwame stopped several yards away and crouched low behind a thicket of wild shrubs, his heart pounding. He peered through the foliage, unwilling to make his presence known. Amahle approached the shack and gently pushed aside a hanging piece of cloth that served as a door. The basket in her arms shifted slightly. From within the darkened interior, a faint, weak voice called out, hoarse but hopeful, "Amahle, is it you?" "Yes, Tumi," she answered softly. "It's me. I brought some food." Inside the shack, Mr. Kwame could just make out a crude wooden cot, sagging under a thin mattress stuffed with rags. On it lay a young man, thin and pale, his lower body motionless beneath a tattered blanket. His hair, once thick and neatly kept, now hung in uneven locks. His arms, though frail, trembled with life as he tried to lift himself. "Tumi," Mr. Kwame whispered under his breath. The name stirred a faint memory from long ago, a bright boy with clever eyes who once ran errands for merchants at the market. Now the boy was a broken shadow of himself. Amahle knelt by her brother's side, setting the basket carefully on the ground. She reached for a cloth and dipped it into a cracked bowl of water. With tender hands she wiped the sweat from Tumi's brow, her touch slow and soothing. "You shouldn't have gone out so far today," he rasped. You must be tired. Hush, Amahle replied. I am fine. You need your strength. She unwrapped the basket, revealing the scraps of bread, fruit, and meat. With careful precision, she tore the food into small pieces and lifted them to her brother's lips. He chewed slowly, swallowing with visible effort. Outside, behind the thicket, Mr. Kwame remained frozen, breath held. The hardness in his chest, long his armor against the world, began to crack. This was no act of deception. No secret lover. No hidden shame. Only a sister, tending to her wounded brother with unwavering love. As Tumi ate, Amahle began to hum softly. The melody drifted through the ruined shack, a gentle, lilting tune. Then, in a voice low and clear, she began to sing the words of an old lullaby. Sleep, little one, the stars will rise. Mama's arms will hold you tight. Through the dark we'll find our way. Tomorrow brings a brighter day. The words faltered for a moment, grief tightening her throat, but she pressed on, her fingers stroking Tumi's hair. The song echoed faintly into the forest clearing. And there, hidden among the shadows, tears welled in Mr. Kwame's eyes. They spilled unbidden down his cheeks, cutting silent paths through the dust on his face. He did not wipe them away. For so long he had believed himself immune to pity, hardened against weakness. But now, witnessing this simple, unguarded moment, one soul caring for another in the depths of poverty, he could no longer cling to that belief. The weight of his earlier suspicions now seemed shameful, foolish. He remained still for a long time, afraid even to move. Through blurred vision, he watched Amahle continue her small acts of care, adjusting the thin blanket over her brother, brushing crumbs from his lips, singing softly as dusk deepened around them. And as darkness settled fully over the clearing, Mr. Kwame knew, something inside him had shifted forever. The stars hung low over the shack as Amahle sat beside her brother, gently stroking his hair until his weary eyes drifted closed. His shallow breaths filled the silence. The forest outside murmured with the sounds of the night, distant crickets, the rustle of leaves, the lonely hoot of an owl. Amahle's gaze drifted to the crooked ceiling above her, worn wood beams crossing in a sagging X. In their cracks, she often imagined the faces of her past, people long gone, dreams abandoned, moments she had no choice but to bury. But tonight, beneath the weight of her exhaustion, the memories rose, unbidden. There had been a time, not so long ago, when her life had been different. Before the shame. Before the hunger. Before the accident. Their father, Bekizitha, had been a strong man, not just in body but in name. A respected miner, a foreman at the great Ngonyama mine that stood like a gaping wound in the earth. It was said that when Bekizitha walked through the market in his dark blue overalls, people greeted him with pride. The mine had brought wealth to Ndlovu, and Bekizitha had stood among its finest. And the mine belonged to the Kwame family. Back then, old Mr. Kwame, father of the man now hiding outside her shack, had been the master of it all: land, stone, gold. His power reached through every corner of the village. What he said became law. Amahle remembered her childhood, warm meals, laughter by the fire. Her father's voice filling the house with songs of their ancestors. Her mother weaving bright cloths, her brother Tumi chasing her through the courtyard with wooden swords. Tumi had been so bright, so full of life. The younger son many fathers dreamed of, a boy who could read and write by the time he was 6, his mind as quick as his feet. Bekizitha had saved every coin for Tumi's schooling. He will not be a miner like me, he used to say. He will wear a scholar's robes. He will build a better life for us all. Then one rainy season everything changed. The rains that year had been cruel, pounding the earth for weeks. The old shafts in the Ngonyama mine weakened, the stone groaning under the weight of water-soaked soil. Warnings were given, softly, without force. Workers spoke of cracks in the beams. The old foreman urged a day's pause. But the Kwame patriarch refused. The shipment was late, and contracts had to be met. Dig, the master had ordered. And so they dug. On the third morning of rain, the earth opened. It happened in an instant. One moment the men worked by lantern light, the next a thunderous roar shattered the tunnels. Walls collapsed. Beams snapped like brittle twigs. Stone and mud poured into the shafts. 40 men perished. Bekizitha among them. When the rescue crews came, they brought out only bodies, broken, nameless beneath layers of earth. Amahle had stood at the edge of the pit, her mother's arms wrapped tightly around her, as the last body was laid upon the ground. Her father's blue overalls were torn beyond recognition. His face was peaceful, almost asleep. She never forgot the weight of that sight. The families gathered, hoping for aid, for justice. The mine had been insured. There was law after all. But when they came to old Mr. Kwame, papers in hand, he had been cold. It was the will of nature, he said. Not the fault of man. The mine will continue. Compensation is not owed. The village elders protested. Priests spoke of curses. But the courts answered with silence. Wealth had its own language. No money came. No apology followed. Amahl's family was left adrift. Grief soon turned to hunger. Their small savings dissolved in weeks. Her mother fell ill. And young Toomey, the bright boy, was pulled from school. No more books. No more dreams of scholars' robes. Only the sharp knowledge that the world had closed its doors on them. Yet they endured. Somehow. Amahle, though only 16, took whatever work she could find. Washing, mending, fetching. The market women took pity at first. But pity fades and pride has its price. Then came the second blow. The mine reopened as though nothing had passed. New crews were hired. And among them, eager for work, Toomey, now 17, thin and desperate, lying about his age to earn a place in the shafts. I must help, he'd said to her. I cannot sit while you work alone. Amahle had begged him not to go. But hunger speaks louder than reason. For months he labored in the mine, sending home meager coins. Until the day the accident came. A new section of tunnel collapsed, crushing Toomey beneath falling stone. Somehow he lived, but his spine was shattered. His legs forever useless. The doctor's words had been final. He would never walk again. The blow left them destitute. Their mother, already sickened by grief, wasted away within a year, her spirit broken. And so it was Amahle who remained, her brother's sole caretaker, his only source of hope. But work was scarce and debts mounted. It was then that a new Kwame, the son, took over the estate. The village whispered, this man was colder even than his father. Yet pride and hunger warred within her. She had vowed never to set foot on Kwame land. Never to serve the house that had stolen her father, crippled her brother, starved her mother. But when the choice was between pride and Toomey's life, she swallowed her shame. And so, with trembling hands, she had begged for work at the estate. Cleaner, the steward had said. No contact with the master. Keep your eyes down. And so she had worked, day after day, week after week, scrubbing the marble halls of the house that had crushed her family beneath its wealth. Never did she speak of her past. Never did she look for pity. Only one purpose kept her moving, to bring scraps to her brother. To keep him alive. Now, in the silence of the shack, these memories ached within her like old wounds. She looked down at Toomey's thin face, his breath steady in sleep. She had done all this for him. And she would continue, no matter how low she must bow. For love. For duty. For the last of her family. Mr. Kwame drove back through the darkened streets of Ndlovu, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. The rhythmic hum of the car's engine felt distant, like a dull throb beneath the storm raging in his chest. The image of the shack lingered before his eyes no matter how hard he tried to shake it. The broken walls, the frail boy on the cot, Amahle's voice as she sang that old lullaby. He had followed her expecting to uncover some shameful secret, to confirm his worst suspicions about her. But what he had witnessed instead was a truth far heavier than he could bear. A sister's quiet sacrifice, a brother's ruined life, a family devastated by the deeds of his own bloodline. The road blurred before him, headlights cutting through the night mist as he sped past empty market stalls and shuttered homes. By the time he reached the estate gates, the stars were high overhead. The mansion loomed before him, its cold stone exterior now a mockery of all he had once taken pride in. He parked the car, pushed open the heavy front doors and strode into the silent halls. The air inside felt thick, oppressive. Not a servant stirred, the household was long asleep. Alone, he climbed the grand staircase to his private study. There, beneath the gaze of dusty ancestral portraits, Mr. Kwame sank into the worn leather chair at his desk. His heart beat heavily in his chest, each thud echoing in the stillness. For the first time in years, his mind was not filled with numbers or contracts or ledgers. No, only the memory of Amahle's hands wiping her brother's brow, her voice trembling with love and grief. How could he have been so blind? A sickness rose within him, not of body but of conscience. He had believed himself better than his father, convinced that with time he had built his fortune through merit and wisdom alone. Yet the foundations of his empire were stained with old sins. And now those sins had faces, Amahle's weary eyes, Toomey's broken body. Unable to bear the weight of uncertainty, he rose abruptly and crossed to the old cabinet in the corner of the room. From within he pulled out a thick, dusty ledger, one of many inherited from his father's years of rule. He flipped through its brittle pages, each line of ink recording names, payments, debts settled and, more often, left unresolved. At last, under the entries from the rainy season of 10 years past, he found it. Gonyama mine. Collapse. 40 men. Bekazitha, deceased. Next to the name in his father's precise script. Compensation denied. Fault, act of nature. The words leapt from the page, each stroke of ink a blade twisting in Mr. Kwame's chest. It was true. Everything Amahle had endured, all of it had begun here, in the cold ledger of his father's hand. Justice had been denied. A family left to ruin, while his own house grew richer on the backs of the fallen. Mr. Kwame closed the book, his hands trembling. The weight of guilt settled heavily upon him, suffocating. He saw again Amahle's thin figure, kneeling in that wretched shack. Not begging for herself, but feeding her brother with scraps scavenged from a life stolen from them. A deep groan escaped his throat. He leaned forward, burying his face in his hands. For all his wealth, for all his power, he was a man undone. And now he knew, he could no longer look away. The morning after, the estate bustled to life as usual. Servants polished the grand floors, prepared the master's breakfast and trimmed the rose gardens. But for Mr. Kwame nothing felt the same. He had spent the night without sleep, pacing his study until the first light of dawn crept through the tall windows. The guilt pressed heavily on him, wrapping around his chest like iron bands. He could no longer ignore the truth, nor could he face Amahle the same way again. At breakfast, when the steward brought in the usual payroll records, Mr. Kwame scanned them with weary eyes. Amahle's name appeared near the bottom of the list, a meager sum that barely fed one, let alone two mouths. He frowned. "Raise her wages," he said quietly. The steward blinked in surprise. "Sir? Double them. And the girl Amahle?" "Yes." His voice left no room for argument. Later, in the kitchens when the staff prepared the day's meals, Mr. Kwame instructed the head cook to prepare an extra bundle for her. Fresh bread, cheese, a small jar of honey, even some cuts of meat. "She works hard," he explained curtly. "See that she eats well." The staff whispered among themselves. It was unlike their master to concern himself with such matters. The once invisible servant girl now drew unexpected attention. When Amahle arrived that afternoon to collect her pay, she noticed the change immediately. The coins in her hand were far more than she was used to. She stared down at them, brow furrowing. And then the bundle from the kitchen, a rich meal wrapped neatly in cloth. The cook handed it to her with a small nod. "For me?" Amahle asked softly. "For you," the cook replied. "Master's orders." A strange unease settled in her chest. Nothing in this world came freely. She knew that better than anyone. Charity often carried a hidden cost, a debt, a loss of dignity, a door to chains. She hesitated, then reluctantly accepted the bundle. But in her heart, mistrust flickered. Why now? Why this sudden kindness from a man who barely noticed her before? 4 days after, the offerings continued. The heavy pay, the good meals. Still, Amahle remained wary. Though her brother's needs grew greater with each passing week, she could not easily set aside her pride, nor forget the history that bound her family to the Kwame's misdeeds. She continued her work as before, silent, diligent, eyes cast downward. No word of thanks passed her lips. To the other servants it seemed ungrateful. But Mr. Kwame understood. He did not expect gratitude. Only forgiveness. But forgiveness was not so easily earned. Finally, the weight of silence grew too much to bear. One evening, after the estate had quieted, Mr. Kwame summoned Kojo. "Prepare the small car," he said. "I need to visit someone." Dressed plainly, he drove once more through the streets of Ndlovu, the path now familiar in his mind. Through the winding alleys and darkened lanes, past the hollow ruins of better days. The forest clearing stood before him again, moonlight silvering the edges of the shack. He approached slowly, his heart heavy. From within, he heard Amahle's soft voice, reading aloud from a battered book, her brother's thin voice murmuring responses. With a breath to steady himself, Mr. Kwame knocked gently on the wood. Inside, the voices stilled. The curtain door was pushed aside and Amahle stepped out, her face tense with caution. When she saw him, this man of wealth and power standing humbly beneath the stars, her eyes flashed with suspicion. "Sir," she said warily. "Why are you here?" He bowed his head, the words difficult to form. "I came to offer an apology." She stared. "An apology? For what my family did to yours?" he continued quietly. "I saw the ledgers. I know now. Your father deserved justice. You, who deserved more than scraps from my table. Amelie's throat tightened, but she forced her voice steady. And now you seek to mend this with gifts? He shook his head. Not gifts. No payment can erase what was done. But I would help your brother. Proper treatment. A doctor in the city. Anything he needs. Amelie's breath caught. The thought of Toomey walking again, of easing his pain, filled her with a desperate hope. And yet, her pride burned hot beneath her ribs. To accept such help from the hand that had once crushed them, it tasted bitter. She clenched her fists. Why now? She whispered. Why, after all this time? Because I was blind, he admitted. And now I see. Silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of years. Amelie's heart warred within her, between a sister's fierce love, a woman's pride, and a soul's longing to heal what had been broken. She lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. I must think on this. And with that she turned back into the shadows of the shack, leaving Mr. Kwame standing alone beneath the stars, hopeful, uncertain, and for the first time in his life, deeply humbled. True to his word, Mr. Kwame wasted no time. The very next day he called upon the best doctor in Ndlovu, a respected physician who often treated the town's elite, and arranged for an examination of Toomey. At first, Amahle remained guarded, standing stiffly at the edge of the room, arms crossed over her chest as the doctor worked. But when she saw the man's gentle manner and heard no arrogance or pity in his tone, her shoulders eased slightly. It is not hopeless, the doctor said after a long hour of careful testing. The injury is grave, yes. But with proper therapy with the right surgeons, there may be a chance for him to regain some strength. Perhaps even walk again, if we act quickly. The words hit Amahle like a rush of wind. For so long she had buried even the smallest hope, afraid it would only bring more pain. Now the door had opened. Within days Mr. Kwame arranged for transport, a clean, well-equipped van, to take Toomey to a hospital in the distant city, one known for its skilled surgeons and modern therapy centers. He hired an attendant to accompany them and gave Amahle a small stipend so she could remain by her brother's side without the burden of working every hour. When the day came for their departure, Amahle stood by the vehicle, one hand clutching her brother's frail fingers. Her eyes, though wary, held a glimmer of something long absent, hope. She turned to Mr. Kwame, who stood a respectful distance away. This is difficult, she said softly, but, thank you. He nodded, saying only, I will do what I can. The rest is in your hands. And then they were off, winding down the old roads toward the city, toward the uncertain promise of healing. In the months that followed, Amahle remained in the city hospital, sleeping in a small cot by her brother's side. The days were long, filled with therapy sessions, slow progress, and moments of deep exhaustion. Yet Toomey's spirit remained strong, perhaps stronger than even Amahle's. I will walk again, sister, he whispered one night as she tucked the blanket around his thin legs. You'll see. Back in Ndlovu, Mr. Kwame watched from afar. He refused to let guilt dictate grand gestures. Instead, he acted quietly, carefully, respecting Amahle's dignity. Without fanfare, he hired a discreet crew of carpenters and laborers, trusted men bound to secrecy. Under the cover of night, they began to repair the old shack, replacing the rotting walls with strong wood, fixing the roof, mending the crooked frame. A fresh coat of paint was applied. New windows were fitted to let in the sun. He gave strict orders, no grand improvements, no signs of charity. Let it remain their home, only safe and strong. Over time, the shack transformed, not into a mansion but into a place of true shelter, of dignity. Villagers noticed, of course. Whispers stirred. But no one dared question it openly, for none knew the full truth of what had passed between the master and the girl. Mr. Kwame spoke little of it to anyone save for the steward, who once asked softly, Sir, why this concern for her? And to that Mr. Kwame replied only, because it is right. And so the wounds, though deep, began, slowly, quietly, to heal. Months passed. The seasons shifted. In the city hospital, slow but steady progress unfolded. Toomey, once unable to move, now pushed himself harder with every session, his determination fierce. With the help of the therapists and the support of his sister's unwavering presence, strength returned little by little to his legs. The day finally came when a new set of sturdy wooden crutches was placed in his hands. The therapist guided him, encouraging each step. His arms trembled, sweat beaded on his brow, but he pushed through the pain, lifting himself upright. Amahle watched from across the room, her heart in her throat as Toomey wobbled and then, step by careful step, moved forward. Tears filled her eyes as he grinned at her. "I told you, sister," he gasped, breathless but joyous. "I will walk again." And indeed he did. With time, his movements grew stronger, more confident. Soon he was ready to return home. When they arrived back in Ndlovu, the villagers gathered quietly to watch. Some were curious, others skeptical, but all were surprised to see Tumi standing tall, leaning on his crutches, smiling faintly beneath the weight of so many trials overcome. Amahle too returned changed. Her heart, once shielded by layers of hurt and pride, had softened, though never broken. She resumed her work at the estate, but it was no longer as a lowly cleaner in the shadows. At Mr. Kwame's insistence, though with great reluctance on her part, she had accepted the role of supervisor, overseeing the other workers with quiet authority. Her voice now carried weight in the halls where once she moved invisible. The staff, seeing the respect their master afforded her, followed suit. As for Mr. Kwame, he too had changed. No longer the cold figure who ruled by distance and silence, he began taking a more active, compassionate role in the affairs of the estate and the village beyond. He funded repairs to the old schoolhouse where young minds could thrive, and he quietly sponsored several students, including Tumi, for advanced learning in the city. Where once he might have ignored the needs of the poor, he now met with the village elders, offering fair wages and improvements to the working conditions in his enterprises. The scars of the past could not be erased, but he worked, step by step, to ensure they were not deepened further. Some whispered that the master had grown soft. Others saw the truth, he had grown wiser. And though Amahle remained wary of too much praise or attention, she could not deny the good he now sought to do. In time, the bitter wounds of the past began to close. The circle of suffering, once unbroken, had begun to turn toward hope. And through it all, brother and sister stood strong, bound by love, shaped by hardship, and now perhaps by the promise of brighter days to come. Years passed and life in Ndlovu slowly transformed. The village grew, schools flourished, and the once crumbling corners of the old quarters found new light. Though time weathered many memories, one tale endured, whispered beneath the market awnings, shared by old grandmothers to wide-eyed children. They spoke of a young girl, thin and proud, who once begged for scraps of bread, not for herself but to keep her crippled brother alive. They told how the rich, cold master of the estate, a man hardened by life, had secretly followed her, seeking shame but finding sorrow. They spoke of how her quiet strength and love had melted the iron in his heart, setting in motion a change that touched every life in the village. She was no ordinary girl, the elders would say. She healed not only her brother, but a man. And through him, the village. In time, a simple plaque appeared at the gates of the Kwame estate. Its words, carved in stone beneath the family crest, caught the eye of every passerby. Compassion is wealth beyond gold. Visitors asked of its meaning, and the old ones would smile knowingly. "Ah, that," they would say. "That is for the girl who changed a king's heart." And though names might fade and faces dim with age, the spirit of the story lived on, in the hearts of children who believed that kindness could soften even the hardest of men, and that love, humble and true, could heal the deepest wounds.